Hello and welcome to 52 Weeks. This week we're continuing in Chapter 5 Housing, and this week we'll be focusing on Part 4 Demographics. Initially this started as 6 categories, but I actually expanded it to 7 because of demographics. So we look at all 7 of them together. Part 1, the introduction. 2, the building typology. 3, building statistics. 4, demographics. 5, issues in housing. 6, observations. 7, building blocks of Harrisburg. Continuing in issues in housing, strategies for housing variety. How do we achieve a variety that brings a lot of different and diverse populations and provides enough economic connection points within the city so that people choose to live here, they actually can afford to live here. Harrisburg currently has a mismatched relationship between existing building type and the residential demand. Due to the time period of Harrisburg's housing development, many houses are designed for household structures different than those seeking housing today. This is one of the biggest problems to understand, and a lot of cities are already going through this. This has been Harrisburg's history through the past probably 40 years, is taking that property and chopping it into multiple apartments. You're looking at this variety when the public engagement happened with the comp plan through all neighborhoods. The things that kept coming up as needs, they wanted single room occupancy, young adult housing, young professional housing, empty nester, luxury housing, accessible housing, aging in place housing, traditional housing, and managed housing. So these were all the needs that were communicated during the public engagement meetings that the comp plan had through 2015 and 16. So it's best that we take this data and figure out, okay, how do we accommodate that? And we also understand this housing variety that we're a unique regional demographic. Harrisburg needs the additional well-managed, attractive apartments at market rate and affordable price points. We are, if we look at the city as this place where things happen, it's a capital. There's a lot of people that commute in and use the city. But the idea is how do we connect to those who are just starting out? And if this is the place where housing is affordable, it should just be that. 87% of apartments have 4 units or less, which suggests this category of apartments occupy converted houses. Again, going back to this idea from the 90s to now is that houses were converted into 4 units or more. And this brings us to our most important issue, that is the converted house issue. So these are primary typology for absentee landlords. This is one of the biggest issues that we have in our neighborhoods. The inexpensive units in buildings with some level of deferred maintenance. These buildings could be had really cheaply and are looked at investor units. I'm using air quotes there because this is what every realtor is out there pushing, is here, get an investor property and this is one way to gain wealth. While this, from a strictly market point of view, looks great, from an economic point of view may look great, but the problem is that's actually doing a disservice to the neighborhood. If we're really true about the issue of place and what that meaning is for non-transactional thinking, we should really reconsider this. So property is not seen as a long-term asset. It's just a flipping of property or a way I can get my money and extract value out of land or a building. And property is allowed to decline until it is no longer inhabitable. So we use this as a resource and really spend it poorly because we're just going to use it until it just deteriorates. And that's where we're at in disinvestment, and it's all through Allison Hill, Camp Curtin, parts of Midtown, and it's not just Harrisburg. This is all of cities throughout the U.S. and looking at urban cores. This is willful disinvestment of a city asset, which affects everyone living in the community. We all recognize this. We should all continue to recognize this and stop calling things blight. This is just disinvestment. We are painting a narrative that we can actually just use the buildings and not have this connection to community. We're in a city which is much different in understanding public space and the relationship to each other and what that disinvestment does for the entire block. This gets us into the housing variety strategies, addressing the converted house and absentee landlord issues, the higher property values, the rigid code enforcement, the ready availability of well-managed, high-quality affordable housing would replace the demands for slumlord units. So this is one thing that comes from the city in policy and looking at enforcement and making sure that we're all in our community looking out for these types of buildings so that we don't accept the slum landlord. When there is maintenance that is not being done for someone who's disconnected from their property, that should be a sign that we get involved from a community point of view and try to figure this out. The idea is really pushing in these things that affect our neighborhood as a whole. And I would take that a step further. If you look at this disinvestment, that leaves a psychological imprint on our youth as well, wandering around the city and what's being invested in, what is actually growing. There's a huge dialogue if you would talk to any youth. What do they see when they walk around the city? What areas are finding development and increase of change versus ones that aren't? This is what's sad to see with the mayor and understanding this pushback about why not be in our neighborhood or that neighborhood, why Midtown and downtown always get the focus. That's part of the reason, is the disinvestment and policies have pushed the growth of just Midtown and downtown, and the rest of the city hasn't been able to see that same benefit. I would say screw the city and do this stuff on our own in a community relationship of these associations at a grassroots level. This is through community participatory planning and actually becoming organized and well planned so that we have these arguments against, that we can make policy change through city council and bring these up at city planning meetings or zoning board hearing meetings. These things matter. Restoring houses to single family units or reducing former houses to fewer apartments could reduce the number of low rent absentee landlord units available in the market. Examples exist in successful private development in lower income neighborhoods, renting clean, well managed 650 square foot apartments. So there's existing markets that are out there if you look at things from a national level that are actually very doable, and we provide dignified living for anybody at any economic level, any age that's there. Everybody who chooses to live here should be able to have dignified living. So the development and management entities, this is looking at the public entities that support development and maintenance of affordable housing. This is within the Department of Building and Housing, the City of Harrisburg. We've got the Harrisburg Housing Authority, and we've got the Tri-County Housing Development Corporation. These are ones that we should become more interactive with the community and actually try to support in a way that bridges these gaps that have been so long term, and also push to them the needs of the residents and understand some of this comp plan stuff and push that back to them as far as renters, affordable housing. They should already know this stuff, but also need support to push into these things from the city level and push back on development that's happening in Harrisburg. What does the Department of Building and Housing do? Its mission to assist the development of viable communities while providing opportunities for citizens to have access to fair, safe, livable, and affordable housing opportunities. So they're looking at increasing the supply of quality housing, ensure economic diversity in new and rehab projects, preserve through rehabilitation and infill construction, preserve the integrity of great neighborhoods in our cities. The next one is the Harrisburg Housing Authority. Its mission has a couple points here: to be best-in-class agency, to provide affordable quality housing, work unyieldingly towards improving the quality of life of our residents, aggressively focus on planning for individual and family self-sufficiency, and lastly, develop and maximize assets and resources for the benefit of our business interests, affirmatively promoting fair housing. And lastly, in this public entity, Tri-County Housing Development Corporation, the mission is listed as to promote and develop affordable housing for low and moderate income individuals and families. Tri-County's activities are structured in a direct response to local affordable housing needs, and projects are developed with the context of building partnerships, revitalizing communities, and supporting homeowners and residents. And one thing that the comp plan points out, that Tri-County Housing Development Corporation is the region's only certified community housing development organization. That's a CHODO. In Dauphin, there were 80 low and moderate income families and individuals that were provided housing. In Allison Hill, we have the new presentation that happened this year with 13 houses since 2011. With that, we can ask, with all these entities, how much housing have they produced in the amount of years? So the question might be, is if they're promoting and focused on advocacy, then why wouldn't they be pushing some of the policy and really affecting change to make sure that this system begins to change and become more affordable? So this is some of the questions we can bring to these groups, is to show us, beyond the number of units that you provided, what is it locally that you've been able to accomplish, and how does the community support the effort even greater? The comp plan also looks at private entities that have supported development maintenance of affordable housing. This is just a list of a couple that were in the comp plan: WCI, Landex, Skynet, Greenworks, and Brickbox. And questions in there, or some of the people that where these are connected to, what is the overall interest? We know that some of the partnerships that we can have is private-public, and when we look at the private entities, really encouraging them and getting into the advocacy of affordable housing. This is where the shift should begin to happen. When we get into the private interests, I think we should be looking at developers who actually get this social aspect and do it from a point of dignity and really want to try to make a difference, instead of doing things to us, to do it with us. And I think that's where that really needs to change. So thanks again for listening to 52 Weeks and wrapping up the building issues. Next week, we're going to be looking at part 6 in chapter 5, which looks at observations. And this is going to continue on more of the observations of where we are in terms of housing units and dignified living. Thanks again. Take care.